What would you do if you discovered that the one moment you were most proud of, the moment you felt most like a hero, was actually the worst thing you ever did to another human being? This is the story of a sheriff who spent his entire life trying not to become his father's killer. A man who pinned on a badge, swore an oath, and built 15 years of reputation on one simple promise: that he would always get it right. He didn't. And the innocent man sitting in that jail cell? And he wasn't just a stranger. He was a mirror. A painful, unforgiving mirror showing the sheriff exactly who he had become. But here's what nobody tells you about justice. Sometimes the most dangerous thing a lawman can do isn't arresting the wrong man. It's having the courage to admit it. Stay with me. Because before this story ends, a woman will die knitting in her chair. A son will take a bullet meant for a stranger to earn the love his father never gave him. And a sheriff will have to choose between saving his reputation and saving his soul. This is not a story about a perfect hero. This is a story about a broken man who refused to stay broken. And it will change the way you think about justice, courage, and redemption forever.
Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching.
Whether it's
Now.
sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story.
Dalton Mercer's father died with a noose around his neck and a lie on his lips. Dalton was 12 years old, standing in a crowd of jeering miners in Dead Hollow, watching his PA swing from the hanging tree for a murder he swore he didn't commit. The town sheriff, a man named Cutler with eyes like chips of flint, had arrested him based on the testimony of one witness and a blood-stained shirt. No trial, no questions. On just, swift frontier justice that left Dalton's mother a widow and young Dalton an orphan by winter's end. That memory lived in Dalton's chest like a shard of broken glass, cutting him every time he pinned on his badge. He'd spent 28 years trying to be the opposite of Sheriff Cutler, thorough, careful, a man who got it right. But now, standing outside the Copper Ridge jailhouse with a telegram crumpled in his fist, he realized he'd become exactly what he feared, and he'd arrested an innocent man. The noon sun hammered down on the dusty street, turning everything to gold and shadow. Dalton's hand trembled as he read the words again. Vernon Pike's confession false. Real evidence contradicts. Crow innocent. Territorial marshal investigating. 3 days ago, he'd dragged Tobias Crow through the same street in iron cuffs, convinced the drifter had murdered the widow Callahan in cold blood. The whole town had watched. Children had thrown rocks. Women had spat. And Dalton had felt righteous, felt like justice itself walking on two legs. Now that righteousness tasted like ash in his mouth. The widow had been shot in her parlor while knitting, a bullet through the heart at close range. Tobias had been passing through town carrying a .45 caliber pistol, the same caliber that killed her. He'd been nervous, evasive, his story full of holes. It had seemed so obvious. Too obvious, Dalton now realized. He'd wanted the case closed fast. He wanted to be the hero who protected Copper Ridge from evil. Just like Sheriff Cutler had wanted to be a hero. Dalton walked back into the jailhouse, his boots echoing on pine boards worn smooth by 15 years of pacing. Tobias sat on the cell cot, face turned toward the barred window where a slice of prairie sky showed blue and endless. He didn't look up when Dalton approached. There was something in his stillness that reminded Dalton of his father the night before the hanging. A man who'd stopped fighting because he knew the world had already decided his fate. Dalton's throat closed. He selected the cell key from his ring, the metal cold and accusing in his palm. The lock clicked open with a sound like breaking bones. "You're free," Dalton said, his voice scraped raw. The real killer confessed down in Bitterwater, Vernon Pike. You were telling the truth all along, and I... The words stuck. How do you apologize for stealing 3 days of a man's life? For making him a monster in the eyes of strangers? Tobias stood slowly, moving like a man who'd aged years in 72 hours. He walked past Dalton and paused at the cell threshold, looking back with eyes that held no anger, only a terrible understanding. Your badge is heavy, Sheriff, Tobias said quietly. I can see it weighing on you. But let me tell you something. My father told me before he died. A man who never admits he's wrong will die drowning in his own pride. You're admitting it. That takes more courage than most lawmen have. Then he walked out into the sunlight, leaving Dalton standing in the empty cell. The sheriff sank onto the cot where Tobias had slept and buried his face in his hands. He'd built 15 years of reputation on being the man who always got it right. Now that the foundation was crumbling like sun-baked adobe. Outside, he could hear Copper Ridge waking to the news, voices rising, boots pounding boardwalks, the town's trust in him evaporating like morning dew. But something gnawed at Dalton's gut, something beyond shame and regret. Vernon Pike's confession didn't sit right. Pike was a 2-bit horse thief with the aim of a drunk and the courage of a mouse. The widow had been killed with a single shot, precise and close. That took nerve and planning. Pike had neither, which meant either the territorial marshal had the wrong man again, or someone had convinced Pike to confess to a murder he didn't commit. Dalton stood and walked to the window, watching townspeople gather in clusters along the street. Their faces were tight with confusion and betrayal. His career was over, he knew that. But maybe, just maybe, he could do one last thing right. Find out who really killed Miriam Callahan, even if it destroyed him in the process, even if it meant facing the same demons that had haunted his father. The ghost of Sheriff Cutler whispered in his ear, "You're just like me, boy. Quick to judge, slow to think." Dalton clenched his jaw. "No," he said to the empty room. "Not anymore." 15 years earlier, Dalton Mercer had ridden into Copper Ridge with nothing but a borrowed horse and a reputation for tracking men through badlands where even Apaches feared to tread. He'd been a bounty hunter then, chasing outlaws for reward money and sleeping under stars that offered no judgment. The town had needed a sheriff after the previous one took a bullet from a drunk cowboy during a card game dispute. Mayor Aldous Finch, younger then, his hair still more black than white, had offered Dalton the badge and $30 a month. Dalton had accepted because he was tired of running, tired of violence, tired of being the man people feared. He wanted to be the man people trusted, and the man his father never got to be. But trust was a currency easily spent and hard to earn back, and Dalton was about to learn that lesson in blood and fire. The town council called an emergency meeting that same afternoon. Dalton walked into the hall to find every seat filled and faces turned toward him like accusers in a trial. Mayor Finch sat at the head table, flanked by the council members. Constance Hale, who ran the general store, Silas Ketchum, who owned the Silver Spur Saloon, Reverend Thaddeus Gaines, and Doc Harlan Pierce. But it was Mayor Finch who worried Dalton most. The old man's face was carved from granite, his eyes cold as January frost. Finch controlled the town's finances, approved every business license, and held the strings to every purse. If he wanted Dalton gone, Dalton was gone. The mayor stood, his cane tapping the floor like a judge's gavel. "Sheriff Mercer, you stand accused of criminal negligence and false imprisonment. You arrested an innocent man, held him unlawfully, and damaged this town's reputation. How do you answer these charges?" Dalton removed his hat, standing before them without armor or excuse. "Guilty on all counts, Mayor. I rushed to judgment. I let pride blind me to the truth. Tobias Crow suffered because of my failure, and I'll carry that shame to my grave. But I'm asking for one chance to make it right. Let me find the real killer. Let me prove I can still serve this town with honor." The silence that followed felt like drowning. Then Silas Ketchum leaned forward, his weathered face troubled. "With respect, Mayor, I've known Dalton for 15 years. He's made one mistake in a career of good service. Seems harsh to throw him out without giving him a chance to redeem himself." Constance Hale shook her head sharply. "One mistake? He locked up an innocent man, Silas. That's not a mistake. That's a failure of character. We can't have a sheriff who shoots first and thinks later." Doc Pierce spoke next, his voice measured and clinical. "The question isn't whether Sheriff Mercer deserves forgiveness. The question is whether the people of Copper Ridge can trust him again. Trust is the foundation of law enforcement. Without it, his badge is worthless." Reverend Gaines nodded slowly. "But redemption is also the foundation of our faith, Doc. Every man deserves a chance to rise from his failures. Now the question is, does Dalton have the strength to do it?" Mayor Finch raised his hand for silence. He pulled a telegram from his coat pocket and smoothed it on the table. "This morning, I received word from the Territorial Marshal's office. They're sending an investigator to review the Callahan murder. Apparently, Vernon Pike's confession has inconsistencies, details that don't match the crime scene. If Pike didn't kill Miriam, then we still have a murderer walking free in Copper Ridge." The room erupted in shocked whispers. Dalton's blood turned to ice water. The mayor continued, his eyes boring into Dalton like drill bits. "Which presents us with a choice. We can fire Sheriff Mercer now and wait for the Territorial Marshal to solve this case for us, admitting to the entire territory that Copper Ridge can't handle its own justice. Or we can give the sheriff 72 hours to find the real killer and prove he still deserves to wear that badge." The council voted in tense silence. Reverend Gaines's hand rose immediately. Doc Pierce hesitated, then lifted his reluctantly. Constance and Silas kept their hands down. Mayor Finch's hand remained flat on the table for a long, agonizing moment. Then slowly, like a man sentencing another to death, he raised it. 3 votes to 2. "Sheriff Mercer, you have 3 days. Find the killer or turn in your badge permanently." "And Dalton?" The mayor's voice dropped to something almost sad. "If you fail this time, don't come back to this town. There won't be anything left here for you." Dalton pinned his badge back on, feeling its weight differently now. Not as armor, but as a millstone around his neck. He had 72 hours to catch a killer and save his soul. The ghost of his father whispered, "They gave you a chance I never got. Don't waste it." Dalton walked out of the town hall into the brutal afternoon sun, knowing that everything he'd built was balanced on a knife's edge. And somewhere in Copper Ridge, a murderer was watching him, laughing. Dalton found Tobias Crow in the last place he expected, sitting beside Miriam Callahan's grave in the churchyard, a bottle of whiskey balanced on his knee. The drifter looked up as Dalton approached, his eyes clear despite the liquor. "Figured I'd pay my respects," Tobias said, gesturing to the fresh-turned earth and the simple wooden cross. "Seems only right," seeing as how I was blamed for putting her here. Dalton stood at the foot of the grave, hat in hand. The inscription was simple. Miriam Callahan, 1809 to 1874. She fed the hungry and sheltered the lost. Dalton had known the widow for 10 years, had seen her at every church social and charity drive, but he'd never really known her. Never asked what secrets lived behind her kind smile. That ignorance shamed him now. "I need your help," Dalton said quietly. Tobias took a long pull from the bottle and laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "That's rich, Sheriff. 3 days ago you had me in chains. Now you need my help?" Dalton met his gaze steadily. Vernon Pike didn't kill Miriam Callahan. His confession is falling apart under scrutiny, which means the real killer is still out there, probably in this town, probably watching us right now. And they're going to walk free unless I can find evidence in 72 hours. I know I don't deserve your help. But Miriam does. She deserves justice, not whatever lie Pike was paid to tell. Tobias studied him for a long moment, then offered the bottle. Dalton took it, feeling the whiskey burn down his throat like penance. "Why do you care so much about getting it right this time?" Tobias asked. "Is it about saving your job or saving your conscience?" Dalton thought about his father swinging from the hanging tree, about Sheriff Cutler's cold eyes, about the weight of a badge that had become a burden instead of an honor. "Both," he admitted. "But mostly it's about proving I'm not my father's ghost." Tobias nodded slowly. "Fair enough. What do you need from me?" Before Dalton could answer, a woman's voice cut through the afternoon air. "Sheriff Mercer, I've been looking for you." They turned to see a young woman approaching through the graves, her auburn hair pinned beneath a simple bonnet, her dress dusty from travel. She carried herself with quiet determination, her green eyes sharp and assessing. "My name is Iris Callahan," she said. "I'm Miriam's niece. I came from Santa Fe to settle her affairs and bury my aunt. And I think I know why she was killed." Dalton and Tobias exchanged glances. Iris reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather journal, its pages yellowed and dog-eared. Aunt Miriam kept detailed records of her charity work, donations, expenses, every penny accounted for. 2 weeks before she died, she wrote me a letter saying she'd discovered something disturbing. She didn't give details, just said she'd found proof that someone in Copper Ridge was using her charity for evil purposes. I thought she was being dramatic. Now I think she was terrified. Dalton took the journal, flipping through pages of neat handwriting. Most entries were mundane. Bread donated to the church, blankets for miners' widows, small cash gifts from townspeople. But as he neared the final pages, the tone shifted. The writing became hurried, almost frantic. One entry from 5 days before the murder jumped out. Received another anonymous donation today. $800 in cash. That's $5,200 in 6 months from anonymous sources. I finally understand where it's coming from. God forgive me. I should have seen it sooner. The ledger tells the whole story. Town funds diverted through false contracts, money laundered through my charity so it looks clean. I confronted him today. He denied everything, said I was confused. But I saw his face. He's afraid I'll expose him. I need to decide what to do. If I go public, I could destroy everything. But if I stay silent, I'm complicit in theft and corruption. What would Jesus do? Dalton's hands tightened on the journal. She doesn't name who she confronted. Iris shook her head. No, but there's more. She opened the journal to the last entry, dated the day before Miriam's death. I went to see Mayor Finch today. Showed him the evidence. He was furious, not at the thief, but at me. Said I should let sleeping dogs lie, or I'd regret it. He knows something. I think he might be involved too. I'm scared. If anything happens to me, the truth is hidden in the church bell tower where I used to pray. May God protect the innocent. The three of them stood in silence, the implications settling over them like a shroud. Mayor Finch, the man who controlled Copper Ridge's finances, the man who'd given Dalton 72 hours to solve this case, might be involved in the widow's murder. Or worse, might have ordered it himself. Tobias spoke first, his voice hard. So, we're looking at corruption that goes all the way to the top. Someone's been skimming town funds, washing the money through the widow's charity, and when she figured it out and threatened to expose them, they killed her. Then they convinced Vernon Pike to confess. Probably paid him or threatened his family. And now they've set you up to fail, Sheriff, so the whole investigation dies with your career. Dalton felt cold spreading through his chest. If Mayor Finch was involved, and then this case was bigger and more dangerous than a simple murder. This was about power, money, and the corruption at the heart of the town Dalton had sworn to protect. We need to find whatever Miriam hid in that bell tower, he said. That's our smoking gun. But we have to be careful. If the mayor suspects we're onto him, he'll kill us too, Iris finished quietly. Just like he killed my aunt. Dalton looked between Tobias and Iris, seeing determination in both their faces. Strange allies for a desperate mission. A disgraced sheriff, a wronged drifter, and a grieving niece. But maybe that's what justice required. Not heroes, but broken people who refuse to quit. Then we go tonight, Dalton said. And we pray we're fast enough to stay alive. Midnight found them in the shadow of the church, a white-painted building that stood at the edge of town like a guardian against the darkness. The bell tower rose 50 feet above them, its copper bell gleaming in the moonlight. Dalton had his lockpicks ready, but when he tried the door, it swung open, unlocked. That sent ice down his spine. Either someone had been here recently, or the church was always open for sinners seeking sanctuary. He hoped it was the latter. They climbed the narrow stairs in darkness, Tobias leading with a shuttered lantern, Iris following, and Dalton bringing up the rear with his hand on his pistol. The stairs creaked with every step, loud as gunshots in the silence. When they reached the top, Tobias opened the lantern fully, and golden light spilled across the small chamber where the bell rope hung. The room was empty, except for dust and spider webs. No hidden documents, no evidence, nothing but disappointment. Maybe someone already found it, Iris whispered, her voice tight with despair. Dalton scanned the room, thinking like Miriam Callahan would have thought. Where would a God-fearing woman hide something precious? His eyes landed on the bell itself, a massive bronze piece cast in 1852, according to the inscription. He walked to it, running his hands along the cool metal surface. There was a seam where the bell's mounting bracket met the wooden beam. He worked his fingers into the gap and felt paper. Carefully, he extracted a folded envelope, water-stained but intact. Inside were 3 documents. A page torn from a ledger showing town expenditures, a series of false receipts for construction projects that never happened, and a handwritten letter. Dalton unfolded the letter and read aloud. To whoever finds this, my name is Miriam Callahan. If you're reading this, I'm probably dead. Mayor Aldous Finch has been embezzling town funds for 3 years. Total amount stolen, approximately $40,000. He creates false contracts for non-existent road repairs and building projects, approves the expenditures, then pockets the money. To hide the theft, he's been donating large amounts to my charity as anonymous gifts, making the money look legitimate when it reappears in his personal accounts. I discovered this by accident when I saw the town ledger at a council meeting. When I confronted him, he threatened my life. I pray someone finds this before it's too late. MC. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Tobias let out a low whistle. $40,000. That's a fortune. Enough to kill for. Enough to destroy anyone who threatened to expose it. Iris's face had gone pale. But why would the mayor kill Aunt Miriam himself? He's not the kind of man who gets his hands dirty. He's a politician, a manipulator. He'd have someone else do it. Dalton's mind raced through the possibilities. The mayor had given Dalton 72 hours to solve the case, knowing the real evidence pointed back to himself. That was either arrogance or a calculated risk. Unless he didn't do it himself, Dalton said slowly. He had someone else pull the trigger, someone loyal to him, someone who owed him favors or feared him enough to commit murder. We're looking for the mayor's enforcer. Tobias nodded grimly. And they're probably watching us right now, waiting for orders to tie up loose ends. As if summoned by those words, footsteps echoed on the stairs below. Heavy boots moving fast. Dalton doused the lantern and drew his pistol, positioning himself beside the doorway. Tobias pulled Iris behind the bell, shielding her with his body. The footsteps reached the top landing and stopped. Then a voice called up, familiar, weathered, and edged with something that might have been regret. "Sheriff Mercer, I know you're up there, and I know what you found. We need to talk before this gets any worse." It was Silas Ketchum, the saloon owner and council member. Dalton's grip tightened on his pistol. Now, Silas had voted against giving him more time. Silas, who dealt in cash every day at the Silver Spur, would have the perfect cover for moving dirty money. Dalton felt the pieces clicking into place like a revolver cylinder. "Come on up, Silas," Dalton called, "but keep your hands where I can see them." Silas climbed into view, hands raised, his face haggard in the moonlight filtering through the tower windows. He was unarmed, no gun belt, no concealed weapons that Dalton could see. But there was something broken in his eyes, something that looked like a man carrying a burden too heavy to bear. "I didn't kill her," Silas said immediately. "I swear on my daughter's life, I didn't kill Miriam Callahan. But I know who did, and I know why. And God help me, I've been too much of a coward to come forward until now." Dalton kept his pistol leveled. "Start talking. You've got 60 seconds before I arrest you as an accomplice." Silas's shoulders sagged. "Bro, the mayor's been laundering money through my saloon, too. He forced me into it 3 years ago when he discovered I was running illegal poker games in my back room. Said he'd shut me down and have me arrested unless I helped him. I didn't know he was using Miriam's charity, too, until after she died. I should have stopped him. Should have found the courage to say no. But he has leverage over me. Not just the illegal gambling, but something worse." He pulled a photograph from his pocket, hands shaking, and it showed a young woman, maybe 17, with Silas's eyes and dark hair. "My daughter, Charlotte. She's in a sanatorium in Denver, dying of consumption. The treatments cost $200 a month, money I don't have. The mayor's been paying for it. He said if I ever betrayed him, he'd stop the payments and let her die. So I kept my mouth shut while he stole, while he killed, while he destroyed everything decent in this town. I'm a coward and a traitor, Sheriff. But I can't live with it anymore. Not after watching you stand in that council meeting and admit your mistakes while I sat there hiding mine. Tears ran down his weathered face. The mayor didn't kill Miriam himself. He had his son do it. The words dropped like stones into a well. Dalton felt his world tilt. The mayor doesn't have a son. He's never been married. Silas laughed bitterly. That's what he wants people to think. But he has a bastard son from his youth. A boy he sent away to be raised by relatives back east. The boy came back 6 months ago, and the mayor's been using him for enforcement ever since. His name is Benjamin Wade. Benjamin Wade lived in a boarding house on the south edge of town, in a room he rented week by week under a false name. Dalton stood across the street in the pre-dawn darkness, watching the curtained window where lamplight flickered. Beside him, Tobias checked the loads in his pistol. Iris stood further back, holding the evidence from the bell tower wrapped in oilcloth. She'd wanted to come despite the danger, and Dalton hadn't had the heart to refuse her. They were past the point of safety now, past the point of rules and proper procedure. This was survival. "We go in quietly," Dalton whispered. "If Wade's the shooter, he'll be dangerous and probably armed. We need him alive so he can testify against the mayor. But if he reaches for a weapon, we put him down," Tobias finished. His eyes were hard, and the eyes of a man who'd seen too much violence to have illusions about mercy. They crossed the street like shadows, boots silent on packed dirt. Dalton picked the boarding house lock in seconds, and they slipped inside. The hallway smelled of old tobacco and boiled cabbage. They climbed the stairs to the second floor, where Wade's room waited at the end of the corridor. Dalton tested the doorknob, locked. He pressed his ear to the wood and heard nothing. Either Wade was asleep or already gone. Dalton stepped back and kicked the door hard, just below the lock. The frame splintered and the door crashed open. They rushed inside, pistols drawn, and found the room empty. The bed was unmade, clothes scattered on the floor, but no sign of Benjamin Wade. Then Dalton saw the note pinned to the pillow, written in hasty script. "I know you're coming, Sheriff. My father sent word that you found the widow's evidence. He wants me to run, but I'm tired of running from what I did. Meet me at the old mining camp east of town at sunrise. Come alone, or I'll disappear forever, and you'll never prove anything against him. I'm ready to face justice. Just not his justice. B.W." Tobias read over Dalton's shoulder and cursed. "It's a trap. The mayor's setting you up to be killed in some abandoned mine where nobody will find your body for months." Dalton folded the note carefully. Maybe, or maybe the son's finally grown a conscience. Either way, I have to go. This might be our only chance to get testimony against Mayor Finch. Iris grabbed his arm. "Then we're going with you. You're not facing this alone." Dalton shook his head. "If it's a trap, I won't let you walk into it. You stay here with the evidence. If I'm not back by noon, you ride to the territorial marshal's office in Silverton, and you tell them everything. Show them Miriam's letter. Make sure the mayor hangs, even if I don't live to see it." Tobias stepped forward. "With respect, Sheriff, that's the dumbest plan I've ever heard. You're not going alone. I didn't survive 3 days in your jail just to watch you throw your life away on some half-baked sense of honor." They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Dalton nodded. "All right, we go together." But Iris stays here where it's safe. Iris's eyes flashed with fury. Safe? My aunt is dead because she tried to do the right thing alone. I'm not letting you make the same mistake. I'm coming with you, and you can't stop me. Dalton saw his own stubbornness reflected in her face and knew he'd lost this argument. Fine, but you stay back and out of the line of fire. If shooting starts, you run. Promise me. Iris nodded. I promise. It was a lie. They both knew it. The sun was just beginning to stain the eastern horizon when they rode out of Copper Ridge. 3 riders heading toward the abandoned mining camp where Silver Dreams had died 20 years ago. The old camp was a graveyard of collapsed shacks and flooded mine shafts, a place where desperate men had once chased fortune and found only hardship. Now it would be the place where truth faced down corruption. They tied their horses a quarter-mile out and approached on foot, using the morning shadows for cover. The camp appeared deserted. Broken windows, sagging roofs, rust and decay everywhere. But then Dalton saw him. A young man standing in the center of what used to be the main square, his hands at his sides, no weapon visible. Benjamin Wade looked like a younger version of Mayor Finch. Same sharp features, same cold intelligence in his eyes. But where the mayor's face was hard with years of calculated cruelty, Benjamin showed something else. Guilt, shame, the weight of a sin too heavy to carry. Sheriff Mercer, Benjamin called. I'm unarmed. I want to surrender. I want to tell you everything. Dalton stepped out from cover, pistol drawn but pointed at the ground. Must then start talking. Why did you kill Miriam Callahan? Benjamin's face crumpled. Because my father ordered me to. Because I'm a coward who couldn't say no to him. Because I thought it would finally make him love me. His voice broke on the last word, and Dalton saw tears streaming down his face. This wasn't a hardened killer. This was a broken boy who'd murdered for approval and found only more emptiness. I came back to Copper Ridge 6 months ago, Benjamin continued. I'd been raised by my mother's family in Philadelphia, told my father was dead. Then on her deathbed, my mother told me the truth, that Mayor Finch was my father, that he'd paid her to disappear and raise me in secret to avoid scandal. I came here hoping he'd welcome me, acknowledge me, give me the family I never had. Instead, he threatened to destroy me if I ever told anyone. Said I was a mistake he'd spent 30 years trying to forget. His hands clenched into fists. But then he offered me a deal. If I helped him with certain tasks, he'd eventually accept me publicly. Give me his name, his legacy. I was desperate enough to believe him. So when he said the widow was threatening to expose his embezzlement, when he said she had to be silenced, he stopped, choking on the words. I went to her house that night. She was knitting in her chair, so peaceful. I tried to threaten her, tried to scare her into keeping quiet. But she just looked at me with these sad eyes and said, "You're Aldis's boy, aren't you? I can see it in your face. Whatever he's asked you to do, child, you don't have to do it. There's always a choice." And God help me, I pulled the trigger anyway. Because I wanted his approval more than I wanted my own soul. The confession hung in the morning air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Dalton lowered his pistol, feeling the weight of another man's sin added to his own collection. But before he could speak, a voice cut through the silence, cold, authoritative, and completely without mercy. Well, this is touching. A father-son reunion and a full confession. How convenient. Mayor Aldis Finch stepped out from behind a collapsed building, a rifle trained on Dalton's chest. And he wasn't alone. 6 men emerged from the shadows, hardened outlaws by the look of them, hired guns wearing deputy badges that Dalton knew were fake. The mayor smiled without warmth. "Thank you for gathering all the evidence in one place, Sheriff. Makes cleanup so much easier." The rifle in Mayor Finch's hands didn't waver. 6 hired guns fanned out around the camp's perimeter, cutting off every escape route. Dalton's mind raced through options and found none that didn't end in blood. Beside him, Tobias had gone utterly still, the stillness of a predator calculating odds. Behind them, Iris stood frozen, the oilcloth packet of evidence clutched against her chest. And Benjamin Wade stood in the center of the square, staring at his father with something between hatred and heartbreak. "You're going to kill your own son?" Benjamin's voice cracked. "After everything I did for you?" Mayor Finch's laugh was cold as January wind. "You were useful until you developed a conscience, boy. That's your fatal flaw. You're weak, just like your mother was. She couldn't handle the reality of what I am, and neither can you. I should have known you'd fold the moment someone showed you kindness." He shifted his aim to Benjamin, and Dalton saw the calculation in the old man's eyes. The mayor wasn't just going to kill them. He was going to erase them, rewrite the story, and emerge as the hero who stopped a corrupt sheriff and his accomplices from destroying Copper Ridge. It was brilliant and monstrous. "Here's what happened," Finch said, his voice taking on the practiced cadence of a politician crafting a narrative. Sheriff Mercer, consumed by shame over arresting an innocent man, conspired with the drifter Tobias Crow and Miriam Callahan's niece to frame me for embezzlement. They convinced my troubled son, a young man with a history of mental instability, to confess to crimes he didn't commit. When I discovered the plot, I gathered a posse of deputies to arrest them. Tragically, they resisted, and in the ensuing gunfight, all 4 conspirators were killed. I'll be devastated, of course, but the town will rally around me, grateful that I exposed this corruption before it destroyed everything we've built. Dalton felt cold fury rising in his chest. This was exactly what had happened to his father. A powerful man rewriting truth to serve his purposes while an innocent person paid with their life. But this time, Dalton wasn't a helpless child watching from the crowd. This time, he had a choice. "There's one problem with your story, Mayor," Dalton said, his voice steady despite the rifle pointed at his heart. "You're assuming you'll survive to tell it." Finch raised an eyebrow. Bold words for a man surrounded by guns. "You think you're fast enough to draw and fire before 6 men cut you down? You think your pride is worth dying for?" Dalton thought about his father's last words, shouted from the gallows. "The truth matters, boy. Even when nobody believes it, the truth still matters." Then he thought about Miriam Callahan, be shot in her chair while knitting, about Tobias, wrongly imprisoned, about every innocent person crushed beneath the wheels of corrupt power. "It's not pride," Dalton said quietly. "It's justice. And yeah, Mayor, it's worth dying for." He moved, not toward his gun, but toward Iris. His body became a shield, covering her, and the evidence she carried as gunfire erupted across the mining camp. Tobias drew and fired in one fluid motion, by dropping the nearest hired gun before diving behind a rusted ore cart. Benjamin Wade, in a final act of redemption, threw himself at his father, knocking the mayor's rifle aside just as it discharged. The bullet meant for Dalton's head whistled past and shattered a window behind them. Then the world became chaos. Muzzle flashes, the crack of pistols, men shouting, smoke and dust turning morning into twilight. Dalton pushed Iris toward cover, behind a collapsed wall, and turned, drawing his Colt. He fired 3 times, each shot deliberate and controlled. 2 men fell. But there were too many guns, too many angles. He felt something punch him in the side, a hot iron brand that stole his breath. He staggered but stayed on his feet, returning fire. From behind the ore cart, Tobias was holding his own, his aim deadly accurate despite the chaos. But they were being overwhelmed, pushed back toward the mine shaft at the camp's edge, a flooded pit that would become their grave. And then Iris did something that stopped Dalton's heart. She stood up from cover, still clutching the evidence, and screamed at the top of her lungs, "Stop! Everyone stop or I'll burn this!" She held a match over the oilcloth packet, her hand steady despite the terror in her eyes. This evidence is the only proof that Mayor Finch embezzled town funds. If you kill us, you'll never recover it. The territorial marshal already knows about this case. If we disappear, they'll investigate everything. But if you let us walk away, I'll give you the evidence, and you can destroy it. Nobody has to die. The gunfire sputtered to a stop. Mayor Finch stepped forward, his face purple with rage. "You're bluffing. That girl wouldn't destroy evidence her aunt died to protect." Iris struck the match. The flame flared bright against the dawn light. "My aunt died because she was braver than I am. But she also died because she tried to fight evil alone. I'm not making that mistake. Sheriff Mercer, Mr. Crow, I'm sorry. But I'm choosing our lives over revenge." She dropped the match. The oilcloth caught, flames consuming Miriam Callahan's letter, the ledger pages, all the proof of the mayor's crimes. The evidence turned to ash and scattered on the morning breeze, 30 years of corruption erased in seconds. Dalton felt his knees buckle, the wound in his side bleeding freely now. Everything they'd fought for, gone. Mayor Finch laughed, a sound of pure triumph. "Excellent choice, my dear. Now..." His words cut off as Iris's hand moved to her bodice and pulled out a second packet, identical to the first. "That was a copy," she said, her voice ringing clear across the camp. "I'm my aunt's niece, Mayor. Did you really think I'd keep the only evidence on me when there are 6 guns pointed my direction?" The mayor's face went white. Iris continued, her fear transformed into something fierce and unstoppable. "The real documents are already on their way to Silverton with a rider I paid before we left town this morning. By noon today, the territorial marshal will have everything. The ledger pages, my aunt's letter, sworn statements from Silas Ketchum about your blackmail. Your empire's already falling, Mayor. The only question is whether you're going to hang for embezzlement or murder as well." Mayor Finch's rifle swung toward Iris with lethal intent. Dalton tried to move, tried to protect her, but his body wouldn't respond. Blood loss was turning his vision gray at the edges. This was it, the moment where evil won and justice died. Then Benjamin Wade, the broken son seeking redemption, threw himself in front of his father's rifle. The shot that was meant for Iris took Benjamin in the chest. He fell, blood spreading across his shirt, and looked up at the mayor with eyes full of sorrow. "I'm sorry," Benjamin whispered. "I'm sorry I couldn't be the son you wanted. Maybe now I can be the man I should have been." He died with those words, his father's rifle still smoking. The silence after Benjamin Wade's death was absolute, broken only by the wind whistling through collapsed buildings. Mayor Finch stared down at his son's body, his face a mask of shock and something that might have been regret. His hired guns exchanged uncertain glances. the certainty of their purpose crumbling. These were men paid to intimidate and kill, not to murder a young woman in cold blood while witnesses watched. And now their employer's corruption was exposed, his legitimacy shattered. Dalton pressed his hand to the gunshot wound in his side, feeling blood pulse between his fingers. His vision swam, but he forced himself to stand straight, to project strength he didn't feel. "It's over, Finch," he said, his voice ragged but firm. "Your son just died trying to save an innocent woman from your bullet. Even these men you hired aren't going to follow you into that darkness. Drop the rifle, surrender, face justice like a man instead of running like a coward." The mayor's hands trembled on the rifle. For a moment, Dalton saw something human flicker in those cold eyes. Grief, maybe. Or the dawning realization of how completely he destroyed everything, including his own son. Then the moment passed, and Mayor Finch raised the rifle toward Dalton one more time. "If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me, Sheriff. You ruined everything. You couldn't leave well enough alone. This is your—" Silas Ketchum's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Drop it, Aldous. It's finished." The saloon owner stepped out from behind the hired guns, a shotgun trained on the mayor's back. His face was haggard but determined, a man who'd finally found the courage he'd been searching for. "I've been your puppet for 3 years. Let you blackmail me, control me, turn me into something I'm ashamed of. But I'm done. My daughter would rather have a father who died doing the right thing than one who lived as a coward. So here's my choice. Put down the rifle, or I'll put you down." Mayor Finch's shoulders sagged. The rifle slipped from his fingers and clattered to the ground. In that moment, the most powerful man in Copper Ridge became just an old criminal caught at the end of his lies. Tobias emerged from behind the ore cart and kicked the rifle away. "Somebody wants to explain why Silas is here?" he demanded. Silas kept the shotgun trained on the mayor. "I followed you from town. Figured the mayor might try something stupid, and I was tired of standing by while good people died. Guess I was right." He looked at Benjamin Wade's body, and his face crumpled. "I'm sorry, boy. You deserved better than him." Dalton staggered, his legs finally giving out. Iris and Tobias caught him before he hit the ground, lowering him gently. Iris tore strips from her petticoat and pressed them to the wound in his side, her hands skilled and sure. "You're losing too much blood," she said. "We need to get you to Doc Pierce." Dalton caught her wrist, his grip weak but urgent. "The evidence. Tell me you really sent a rider to Silverton. Tell me this wasn't all for nothing." Iris's smile was fierce despite the tears on her cheeks. "I sent the rider last night, after we found the documents in the bell tower. I'm not my aunt, Sheriff. She believed in the system, believed that telling the truth would be enough. I believe in insurance. The marshal has everything. Mayor Finch's corruption, Benjamin Wade's confession, and Silas Ketchum's testimony about the blackmail. Even if we'd all died here today, the truth would have survived us." Relief flooded through Dalton, so powerful it made him dizzy. Or maybe that was blood loss. Hard to tell. Tobias was organizing the scene with military precision, disarming the hired guns who'd lost all stomach for violence. "Silas, help me tie these men up. We're marching them all back to town to stand trial, every last one." Within an hour, the strange caravan was moving back toward Copper Ridge. 6 hired guns bound and walking, Mayor Finch in shackles and silent, Silas Ketchum leading the way with his shotgun. Benjamin Wade's body was wrapped in a blanket and tied across a horse, the final casualty of his father's ambition. Dalton rode slumped in his saddle, held upright only by Iris's arm around his waist and Tobias guiding his horse. The wound had stopped bleeding, but the damage was done. He'd need real medical attention soon, or he wouldn't make it. As they crested the ridge overlooking Copper Ridge, Dalton saw the town spread out below in the morning light. It looked peaceful from this distance, innocent, like the kind of place where justice and decency still meant something. He wondered if it ever really had been that place, or if corruption had always festered beneath the surface. Maybe every town had its secrets, its compromises, its deals with darkness. Maybe the question wasn't whether evil existed, but whether good people dared to fight it. They rode into town at noon, and within minutes, the street was lined with people. Word had spread. Someone must have ridden ahead with news of the confrontation at the mining camp. Faces showed shock, confusion, often anger as they saw their mayor in chains, saw Sheriff Mercer bleeding and barely conscious. Constance Hale pushed through the crowd, her face pale. What happened? "Sheriff, are you—" "Get Doc Pierce," Iris commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. "The sheriff's been shot, and we need the territorial marshal here immediately. We have a full confession to Mayor Finch's embezzlement and the murder of Miriam Callahan." The crowd erupted in chaos. Some people shouted denials, refusing to believe their mayor was a criminal. Others demanded immediate justice, calling for a hanging. But Dalton had no attention left for mob dynamics. His vision was tunneling down to a pinpoint of light, and he could hear his father's voice whispering from across the years. "You did good, boy. You got it right this time." Dalton let his eyes close and let the darkness take him. He'd done what he came to do. The rest was in justice's hands now. But his consciousness faded. One thought burned bright. He'd finally become the lawman his father never got to be. Not perfect, not infallible, but honest. And willing to die for the truth. That would have to be enough. Dalton woke to whitewashed walls and the smell of carbolic acid. Doc Pierce's clinic. Afternoon sunlight slanted through the window, suggesting he'd been unconscious for hours. His side burned with every breath. But when he prodded the bandages, the bleeding had stopped. The doctor had done good work. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it, as pain lanced through his torso. A hand on his shoulder pushed him gently back down. "Easy, Sheriff. You're not healed yet." Tobias sat in a chair beside the bed, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "How long?" Dalton rasped. 2 days, Tobias said. "You've been in and out of consciousness. Doc said the bullet missed anything vital. But you lost enough blood to kill most men. He said your stubbornness is the only thing keeping you alive." Dalton managed a weak smile. "What happened?" "The mayor, the hired guns—" "All in custody," Tobias assured him. "The territorial marshal arrived yesterday with a full investigative team. Iris gave them everything. The evidence from the bell tower, Silas's testimony, statements from the hired guns who turned on the mayor in exchange for lighter sentences. It's airtight, Dalton. Mayor Finch is going to hang for Miriam's murder and Benjamin's. The embezzlement charges alone would have put him away for life. But he committed murder to cover his crimes. That's a hanging offense in the territory." Relief washed over Dalton. So powerful it brought tears to his eyes. "And you? Iris? Silas?" Tobias's expression darkened. "I'm officially exonerated. The territorial marshal apologized on behalf of the territory for my wrongful arrest. It's cold comfort, but it's something. Iris is staying in Copper Ridge to rebuild her aunt's charity on an honest foundation. And Silas, He paused, choosing words carefully. The marshal wanted to arrest him as an accomplice, but Iris and I testified that he was coerced through blackmail and ultimately helped stop the mayor's final crime. The judge agreed to probation instead of prison, provided Silas testifies at the trial. And he's already started making arrangements to bring his daughter here from Denver so he can care for her properly. Doc Pierce thinks the mountain air might help her consumption. Dalton closed his eyes, feeling pieces of justice click into place. Not perfect justice. Silas had been complicit in corruption, even if fear drove him. But mercy tempered with accountability. That felt right. "What about my badge?" Dalton asked quietly. "Am I still sheriff of Copper Ridge?" Tobias stood and walked to the window, looking out over the town. "The council met yesterday while you were unconscious. Constance Hale moved to permanently revoke your badge, citing your initial wrongful arrest of me as proof of incompetence. Doc Pierce and Reverend Gaines argued against it, saying you'd redeemed yourself by exposing the mayor's corruption at great personal cost." He turned back to face Dalton. It came down to Silas Ketchum's vote. He was the tiebreaker. And you know what he said? Dalton shook his head. He said, "Sheriff Mercer made a terrible mistake and owned it. He could have hidden behind his badge and let the corruption continue, but instead, he risked everything to make it right. That's the kind of lawman I want protecting this town. One who knows he can be wrong and fights twice as hard because of it. The vote was 3-2 in your favor. You keep the badge. But with conditions. You get a deputy to provide oversight, you undergo additional training, and you report quarterly to the town council. You're on probation, Sheriff. One more mistake like arresting me, and you're done." Dalton felt emotion welling up in his chest. After everything, after nearly dying and destroying the man who'd controlled this town for decades, they were giving him another chance. Not because he deserved it, but because he'd proven he could learn from his failures. "I want you as my deputy," Dalton said suddenly. Tobias blinked in surprise. "What? You heard me. You're smart, you're honest, and you've seen both sides of the law. You know what it's like to be wrongly accused, to have the system fail you. That perspective is exactly what I need to keep me honest. Plus, you can shoot and think under pressure. Those are good skills in a deputy." Tobias laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. "Sheriff, 3 days ago, I was sleeping in your jail cell. Now you want to give me a badge? That's the craziest thing I've heard all week." Dalton met his eyes steadily. "I'm offering you a chance to be part of something good. A chance to help rebuild justice in a town that lost its way. You can say no and ride off as you planned. But I'm hoping you'll say yes. Because I can't do this alone anymore. I need someone who'll call me out when I'm wrong. Someone I trust. And strange as it sounds, I trust you." Tobias was silent for a long moment, in his weathered face unreadable. Then slowly, he nodded. "All right, Sheriff. I'll give it a try. But first sign you're arresting innocent people again, I'm taking that badge and walking." Dalton extended his hand. "Deal." They shook, sealing an alliance forged in injustice and tempered in the fire of redemption. A knock on the door interrupted them. Iris entered, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. She looked different than she had at the mining camp, less haunted, more purposeful. Like she'd found something worth fighting for in the ashes of her aunt's death. "I brought food," she said, setting the basket on the side table. "Doc says you need to eat to recover strength. And I wanted to check on you." Make sure you're actually alive and not just Tobias's hallucination. Dalton smiled. I'm alive. Barely, but alive. And I hear you're staying in Copper Ridge, taking over your aunt's work. Iris nodded. Someone needs to finish what she started. The charity is in shambles after being used for money laundering. But with the recovered funds from the mayor's accounts, we can rebuild. Help the miners' widows, provide shelter for families in need. Do the work Aunt Miriam would have wanted. She looked out the window toward the church where her aunt was buried. I used to think she was naive, believing that goodness could overcome corruption. But she was right. It just took longer than she expected, and it required other people to finish the fight she started. Dalton thought about his father, about Miriam Callahan, about Benjamin Wade dying to protect an innocent woman. Sometimes justice requires sacrifice, he said quietly. The question is whether we're brave enough to pay the price when it's demanded. Iris smiled, sad but certain. My aunt paid it. You nearly did. For now it's up to the rest of us to make sure their sacrifices meant something. Mayor Aldous Finch was hanged on a cold November morning, 3 months after his arrest. The trial had been swift and conclusive. Too much evidence, too many witnesses. No possibility of acquittal. He'd shown no remorse, maintaining his innocence even as the judge read the death sentence. Standing before the gallows now, wearing the same expensive suit he'd worn to council meetings, he looked smaller somehow. So less like the man who'd controlled Copper Ridge for 30 years, and more like any other criminal facing the consequences of his choices. The whole town turned out to witness justice. Dalton stood at the front of the crowd, his deputy Tobias beside him. The wound in Dalton's side had healed to a puckered scar, but it still ached when storms approached, a permanent reminder of the price he'd paid for truth. He wore his badge polished bright, a symbol he'd finally learned to carry with humility instead of pride. The territorial marshal read the charges: embezzlement, conspiracy to commit murder, and first-degree murder in the deaths of Miriam Callahan and Benjamin Wade. Each word fell like stones into still water, rippling out through the crowd. Some people wept. Others stood stone-faced. Mayor Finch had been loved and feared in equal measure, and his fall had shaken the town's foundations, and they were still learning to rebuild on the bedrock of truth instead of the quicksand of corruption. The marshal asked if Finch had any last words. The old man stood silent for a long moment, his eyes scanning the crowd. They landed on Dalton, and for just an instant, the mask slipped. Dalton saw fear there, and something that might have been regret. Not for what he'd done, but for getting caught. I built this town, Finch said finally, his voice carrying across the square. I brought prosperity and order when there was only chaos. Everything I did for Copper Ridge's future. History will remember me as a visionary who was betrayed by small-minded fools who couldn't see beyond their petty morality. The crowd stirred, anger rippling through them. But Dalton felt only sadness. The mayor truly believed his own lies, believed that the ends justified the means, that power absolved sin. He'd die without ever understanding the damage he'd caused. And the marshal placed the hood over Finch's head and adjusted the noose. A reverend said a prayer. Then the trapdoor opened, and Aldous Finch fell, his neck breaking cleanly. The crowd was silent. No cheers, no celebration. Just the weight of watching corruption finally face consequences. As people began to disperse, Tobias leaned close to Dalton. "Feel like justice?" he asked quietly. Dalton thought about Miriam Callahan, shot in her chair while knitting, about Benjamin Wade, dying to protect Iris. About his own father, hanged for a crime he didn't commit while a corrupt sheriff watched. Feels like the end of one story and the beginning of another, Dalton said. Justice isn't a moment. It's the work we do every day to make sure power doesn't corrupt, to make sure the innocent aren't crushed, to make sure we remember that every person has worth and dignity. Today was necessary. Tomorrow's when the real work starts. Iris joined them, linking her arm through Dalton's. She'd taken to wearing her aunt's locket, a small piece of Miriam carried close to her heart. The charity's reopening next week, she said. We've renovated the building, hired new staff, and established oversight to prevent any future misuse. I'd like you both to serve on the board of directors. Your presence would send a message that this organization is committed to transparency and justice. Dalton nodded. It would be an honor. As they walked back toward the town center, Silas Ketchum approached, his daughter Charlotte on his arm. The girl was thin and pale from her illness, but there was color in her cheeks and light in her eyes. The mountain air and her father's renewed presence were healing her slowly. Sheriff, Silas said, stopping them. I wanted to say thank you for giving me the chance to make things right. I know I don't deserve forgiveness for what I did, but... Dalton held up a hand. You paid your debt by stopping the mayor from killing us all, but you chose courage when it mattered most. That counts for something. He looked at Charlotte, seeing hope in her young face. Your daughter has her father back. Make sure you become the man she believes you are. Silas's eyes glistened with tears. I will. I swear it. He led Charlotte away, and Dalton watched them go, thinking about redemption and second chances. How many people in this town had compromised themselves in small ways, made deals with corruption, and looked the other way when something didn't feel right? The mayor's fall was dramatic, but the real test would be whether Copper Ridge learned the lesson that evil thrives when good people do nothing, and justice requires constant vigilance. Constance Hale emerged from her general store, waving Dalton over. She'd been one of his harshest critics during the council vote, but since the trial, her attitude had softened. Sheriff, I owe you an apology, she said stiffly. I misjudged you. Thought you were just another corrupt lawman covering his mistakes. But you proved me wrong. You risked everything to expose the truth. That takes character. I didn't think you had. Dalton accepted the apology with a nod. I gave you reason to doubt me, Mrs. Hale. I hope to spend the rest of my career proving I've learned from my mistakes. She studied him with sharp eyes. See that you do, Sheriff. This town's watching you. Don't waste the second chance we gave you. As Dalton, Tobias, and an Iris continued down the street, Doc Pierce called out from his clinic doorway. Sheriff, got a telegram for you. Came in this morning. Dalton took the paper and read it, his expression tightening. It was from the Territorial Marshal's office, informing him that they'd arrested 3 more corrupt officials in neighboring counties, all connected to Mayor Finch's embezzlement network. The investigation Dalton had started was spreading, revealing rot that went far beyond Copper Ridge. What is it? Tobias asked. Dalton handed him the telegram. Turns out Mayor Finch wasn't working alone. He was part of a larger corruption ring. The marshal wants me to testify at the other trials, help them build cases against the remaining conspirators. Tobias let out a low whistle. So this isn't over. Dalton looked at the telegram, then at his deputy, then at the town he'd sworn to protect. Justice is never over, Tobias. It's a fight that doesn't end. We just choose which side we're on and do the work. Iris smiled. Then I guess we'd better get to work. The three of them walked back to the sheriff's office together, an unlikely alliance forged in blood and vindicated by truth. Behind them, the gallows stood empty, a reminder of justice served. Ahead, the future waited, full of challenges and corruption yet to be exposed. But for the first time in his life, Dalton Mercer felt ready to face it. Not because he was perfect, but because he'd learned to admit his flaws and fight harder because of them. The ghost of his father's voice whispered one last time, "Proud of you, boy. You became the man I never got to be." Dalton touched his badge, feeling its weight as a promise rather than a burden. Then he stepped into his office to begin the next chapter of justice in Copper Ridge. 6 months after Mayor Finch's execution, Copper Ridge began to feel like itself again, when the scars were still visible. Buildings that had been financed with embezzled money stood as reminders of corruption. Families who'd lost breadwinners to the mayor's schemes still struggled. But healing had begun. Dalton stood on the jailhouse steps, watching the morning sun paint Main Street in shades of gold and amber. His deputy Tobias was inside writing reports, the scratch of pen on paper a soothing sound. They'd settled into an easy partnership, or two men who'd been on opposite sides of the law, now working together to rebuild it. Tobias called him out when his old pride surfaced, when he started making assumptions instead of asking questions. And Dalton was grateful for it. Humility, he'd learned, was a daily practice, not a destination. The town had changed, too. People asked more questions now, demanded transparency from their elected officials, and showed up to council meetings instead of blindly trusting. And Miriam Callahan's death had taught them that corruption thrives in darkness and dies in light. They'd voted in a new mayor, Reverend Gaines, a man whose integrity was beyond question. It wasn't a job he'd wanted, but he'd accepted out of duty. The church bell rang 9 times, signaling the start of the morning. Dalton descended the steps and began his patrol, nodding to shopkeepers opening their businesses. Mrs. Hale waved from the general store. Silas Ketchum swept the boardwalk in front of the Silver Spur, his daughter Charlotte helping him despite her lingering illness. Small moments of normalcy that felt precious after months of chaos. At the edge of town, Dalton found Iris Callahan standing beside her aunt's grave. She came here every morning before opening the charity office, a ritual of remembrance and rededication. Dalton joined her in silence, removing his hat. "Morning, Sheriff," Iris said softly. "Morning, Miss Callahan. How's the charity work coming?" Iris smiled. "We've helped 12 families this month, provided food, clothing, and medical care for minors' widows and children. It's what Aunt Miriam would have wanted, what she died fighting for." She touched the headstone gently. "I used to think she was a saint, you know, perfect and beyond reproach. But I've learned she was just a woman who chose to do what was right, even when it cost her everything. That's harder than being a saint, and that's being human." Dalton thought about his own journey from pride to humility, from certainty to doubt to hard-won wisdom. Your aunt taught this town an important lesson. Sometimes the price of justice is everything we have, but paying it is the only way to live with ourselves. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, then walked back toward town together. As they passed the schoolhouse, children's voices rang out in a reading lesson, a new generation growing up in a town that had learned the cost of corruption. Maybe they'd do better. Maybe they'd remember. At the sheriff's office, Tobias had finished the reports and was brewing coffee. The smell filled the small space with warmth. "Got a visitor coming," Tobias said, nodding toward the street. "Young man, looks nervous. Asked to see you specifically." Dalton followed his gaze and saw a rider approaching. A boy, maybe 18, dusty from travel, leading a tired horse. The kid dismounted and tied his horse to the rail, then climbed the steps with visible trepidation. "Sheriff Mercer?" the boy asked. "I'm looking for Sheriff Dalton Mercer." Dalton stepped forward. "That's me. What can I do for you, son?" The boy swallowed hard. "My name's Jacob Crow. I'm Tobias Crow's nephew. My uncle wrote to me about what happened here, about how you arrested him by mistake and then worked together to catch a killer. He said you were a man who admitted his errors and fought to make them right. I want to learn to be a lawman like that. I came to ask if you'd teach me." Dalton glanced at Tobias, who was watching from the doorway with an unreadable expression. Then he looked back at the boy, earnest, young, full of idealism that hadn't been broken yet. He saw himself at that age, desperate to prove himself, hungry for purpose. "Being a lawman isn't about being perfect," Dalton said carefully. "It's about being honest, about admitting when you're wrong and working twice as hard to get it right. It's about serving people who'll hate you when you fail and forget you when you succeed. It's thankless, dangerous work that'll age you before your time. You sure that's what you want?" Jacob nodded firmly. "My uncle said you're the kind of sheriff who makes the badge mean something. That's what I want to learn. Not how to be perfect, but how to be worth the trust people put in me." Dalton felt something shift in his chest, a sense of the circle completing. He'd been the wrongdoer who was forgiven, the corrupt sheriff's son who'd spent his life trying to be different. Now here was a chance to pass that lesson forward, to shape a young man who might carry justice further than Dalton ever could. "All right, Jacob Crow, I'll teach you. But you'll start at the bottom, cleaning cells, mucking stables, like watching and learning before you ever wear a badge. And if you lie to me even once, you're done. We clear?" Jacob's face lit up with joy. "Yes, sir. Crystal clear, sir." Tobias stepped out onto the porch, clapping his nephew on the shoulder. "Welcome to Copper Ridge, Jake. Hope you're ready for the education of your life." As the three of them stood there in the morning sun, a sheriff redeemed, a deputy wronged, and now vindicated, and a young man just beginning his journey, Dalton felt the weight of legacy settling over him. This was how justice survived. Not through perfect men, but through imperfect ones who taught the next generation to do better, to learn from mistakes, to keep fighting even when the cost was high. Down the street, Iris opened the doors to the Women's Future Foundation, welcoming the day's visitors. Silas Ketchum served the breakfast to early customers at the Silver Spur, his daughter smiling beside him. Reverend Gaines walked toward the town hall, ready to govern with integrity. Copper Ridge was healing. Not quickly, not easily, but genuinely. The scars would always remain. Miriam Callahan's grave, the empty mayor's chair, Dalton's bullet wound that ached in cold weather. But scars were proof of survival. Proof that you'd faced darkness and lived to tell about it. Dalton looked at Tobias and Jacob, at the town spreading out before them, yet the badge on his chest that he'd finally learned to wear with humility. "All right, gentlemen," he said. "Let's get to work. This town needs protecting, and we're the ones foolish enough to try." They walked into the office together. 3 generations of justice learning to coexist. Behind them, the ghost of Sheriff Cutler faded into memory, replaced by something better. The example of a man who'd failed, admitted it, and spent the rest of his life making it right. In the distance, the storm clouds gathered on the horizon. There would be more challenges, more corruption to root out, more mistakes to learn from. But Dalton wasn't afraid anymore. He'd faced his worst failure and survived. He'd looked into the mirror and seen both his father's ghost and his own capacity for error. And he'd chosen to keep fighting anyway. Because that's what justice required, not perfection, but persistence. Not heroes, but humans who refused to quit. As the first drops of rain began to fall, washing the dust from Copper Ridge's streets, Dalton Mercer stood at his office window and made a silent promise to every person who'd suffered from corrupt power, from rushed judgment, from justice delayed or denied. He would get it right. Not every time. He was still human, still fallible. But he would try. Every single day he would try. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The rain fell harder, a cleansing storm that would leave the town fresh and new. Dalton watched it come and smiled. Perfect.